Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important updates that took place during the previous night at the local time. First, we're going to talk about Robotyne area. We continue receiving significant number of different updates from this territory. The Russians continue offensive operation, according at least to the sources on the ground. When talking about geolocations, we haven't received any updates, any confirmation of Russian progress inside of the village, or let's say along the in the fields between Robotyne and Verbowe. But anyway, let's start. First updates, first details about the clashes in Robotyne we start receiving yesterday somewhere at 7 p.m. of the local time. And the Russians reported that the Russians launched an offensive operation and managed to answer Robotyne from the south, or at least they managed to establish control over the stronghold to the south of the village. But when talking about geolocations, also this morning we received significant number of geolocations of Russian FPV drone strikes against the territory. Maybe that those were something like FPV drone preparation before the active phase on the ground. Very difficult to understand, but anyway, we have geolocations confirming that this territory is still under Ukrainian control, or at least was under Ukrainian control before the Russians launched an offensive. So at least we have different updates, as you can see, and we know for sure, we can say for sure that the territory of Robotyne is currently covered with the fog of war. Later at 10 p.m. at 10:30 p.m. of the local time, the Russians reported that 32nd Mechanized Division managed to enter the southern part of Robotyne and to establish control over the first streets. So let's say by 10 p.m. of the local time, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish control over something like this. Once again, yet haven't received any geolocated confirmation of this progress. From the other side, this morning, to be more precise, at 9 a.m., so during the night there were very heavy clashes between Russian and Ukrainian army, and at 9 a.m. of the local time, we received the report that the Russians managed to establish control not just over the southern streets of Robotyne, but also over the western streets of Robotyne. So let's say by 10 a.m. of the local time, this is something like a progress of the Russian armed forces in Robotyne itself. So as we can see, if this information is confirmed, obviously today we will receive more updates of clashes from the inside of the village. The Ukrainians very likely will try to redeploy some reserves for stabilization of the front line. The Ukrainians are going to use T-0408 road for these purposes. Obviously today we're also going to receive a lot of updates, a lot of videos of FPV drone strikes and Lancet strikes against the Ukrainian forces moving from the north to the south. From the other side, we received the video confirmation from the Ukrainian side. This video was published by the Ukrainian sources. On this video, we can see Ukrainian soldiers who were moving along the ruins and streets of Robotyne from one direction to another. And the author of this video says that this is fresh video of 18th of February, of evening of 18th of February. And according to the author of this video, he says that, as you can see, the situation is calm, no clashes, no clashes, no fightings, nothing happened. Every situation is stable and something like this. So once again, currently it's very difficult to understand what exactly is going on in Robotyne. We need more details, more time to understand. But very likely the Russians launched an offensive operation, but once again we need more details. When talking about Verbowe direction, the sources reported about additional Russian progress in the fields between Robotyne and Verbowe itself, and according to different mappers, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish control over this territory, yet we haven't received any geolocated confirmation of this progress. But as I believe, this information first was confirmed by Deep State pro-Ukraine map, and this morning this information was confirmed by Syriac map. So we know that these are more or less reliable resources, so maybe we can find this progress on the fields like this one. Also, important thing that when talking about the fields, not about Verbowe, but about the fields, the Russians managed to, the Russians were attacking like of 1.5 kilometers, let's say, broad front line, and they managed to deep inside the Ukrainian defense, to get deep inside the Ukrainian defense belt for another 2 kilometers. During the previous day, the Russians were bombing the fields to the north of the fields in the vicinity of Verbowe. The Ukrainians used this area, use this area for supply and support of their forces. So when talking about the supply roads, there are two supply roads from the Ukrainian side. The first one along from Novodanilovka to Robotyne, and the second supply road goes from Mala-Takmachka through the fields in this direction. So one of the supply roads was under very heavy fire, and that allowed the Russians to conduct, let's say, offensive operations. So today we're going to receive more updates, and obviously today the fog of war will disappear a little bit, and we're going to receive more updates about the situation. Anyway, the sources, the Western sources reports about that currently there are 5 directions of Russian attack, and Robotyne is not the only one. According to information we have from the Western sources, from CNN News, the Russians concentrated around 40,000 soldiers in the vicinity of Mariupol, for example, 40,000 soldiers, and I'll remind you that the Russians used the same number of forces, around 40,000, to storm Avdiivka. And when talking about Mariupol, these 40,000 the Russians can use for offensive operation in the direction of Novomikhailivka and Ugledar. So in the very near future, we might see another Russian attack, primary attack, and also the Russians reported that they concentrated around 110,000 soldiers in the vicinity of Kupyansk Liman. So once again, as we discussed yesterday, Robotyne offensive operation may be just a primary attack with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to redeploy reserves in this area, and after the Ukrainians do this, the Russians will intensify their activity in Novomikhailivka, South Donetsk direction, or maybe on Kupyansk area. So very difficult for now to understand what are the next Russian plans. When talking about Avdiivka, during the previous 24 hours, during the previous night, we got the video of a strike with Iskander, with ballistic missile in Selidova. The Russians discovered another Ukrainian temporary position, and as a result of Iskander strike, that temporary position was destroyed. There were 2 very accurate strikes. Another building where the Ukrainians was destroyed. Currently, we don't know about the Ukrainian losses, but obviously the Ministry of Defense will provide this information. Today. Maybe this is the strike that the Russians made few days ago. If you remember, during the previous few days, we were talking about, let's say, very powerful strikes in Selidova, and that's where Ukrainians lost significant number of losses, a few hundreds of soldiers or something like this. So today, probably we're going to receive some updates about that strike. When talking about Avdiivka itself, the situation was stabilized. We see that the Russians are slowing down, and the main thing is that the Russians probably managed to develop their positions a little bit further to the west in direction of in the village by the name of Lastachkina, so very likely that this territory is under Russian control. But the thing is that the Russians stopped. And the clashes for Lastachkina also stopped, and the Russian sources reported that currently neither the Ukrainians nor the Russians control the village Lastachkina, and that this territory is in the gray zone. So once again, as we discussed, very likely that the Russians launched the offensive operation in the direction of Lastachkina on the 15th, 16th, and 17th of February, with the purpose to close the cauldron and not to allow the Ukrainians to leave the area. But when the situation with Avdiivka ended and the Ukrainians managed to evacuate most of the soldiers they could evacuate, the Russians lost any need in further offensive operation in direction of the, let's say, rivers and waters like Umansk, Orlovka, at least for today. Within the next few weeks, they will renew their offensive operation, but for now they don't need this. But the only thing I'm sure for 100% that the next few days the Russians will try to improve their positions along these let's say, tree lines, and they will try to get as close as possible to the Ukrainians. They will make rotation, regrouping, redeployment, and so on, and this gray zone will be captured, maybe even further to the west, as close as possible to Severne. Anyway, within the next months, all these 4 towns, or maybe even 5 towns, 6 towns like Stepova, Berdichi, Orlovka, Lastachkina, Tonenka, and Severne will be taken by the Russians because it's very difficult for the Ukrainians to protect them. So this is the situation on this direction. Now we are moving to Bakhmut, Artyomovsk area. Most of the mappers confirmed our information we provided a few days ago that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to get as close as possible to Ivanovska itself. And now most of the mappers shows that these fields are under complete Russian control. We have this confirmation from Syriac map. We have this confirmation from pro-Russian mappers. So this is the situation in this area, and if this information is correct, if this is not just a speculation by mappers and different war military journalists, then the Russians are about to start the ground operation inside of Ivanovska. Maybe they have already started this, and so obviously the next few days we're going to receive more updates. From the other side, the Russian continue storming and clearing operation in direction of Chasiv Yar, additional FPV drone strikes and bombing of the Ukrainian forces. So nothing special. This area is was well fortified by the Ukrainians. Regarding their words that nothing is prepared for a defense operation, we see some strongholds, and obviously it will take time before the Russians are able to clear them completely. On this video we can see another strike against another Ukrainian personnel carrier who were moving from one position to another, but some Russian sources confirm some progress. So for now, this is the situation on this direction. Furthermore, during the previous night, we got report about very heavy explosion, very heavy strike against the positions of Ukrainian forces in the city by the name of Kramatorsk. Currently, very difficult to understand the results, but a big industrial area, big industrial factory was damaged. Very likely the Ukrainians were using this territory as temporary positions or something like this. The progress in the Russian offensive operation in direction of Zhirivtsi continues, and once again, when talking about Kupyansk, currently we don't see any updates from this territory, but according to the Western sources, the Russians have concentrated 110,000 soldiers on this direction, and this is a very big army, 110,000 soldiers. I'll remind you once again that to storm Avdiivka, the Russians used around 40,000 soldiers. The Russians concentrated around 40,000 soldiers on the South Donetsk direction, and very likely the Russians have something between 40 and 60,000 on Robotyne area. So we see that on these three directions there are soldiers, but the number of soldiers are much less in comparison with Kupyansk, and obviously the Russians do have some big plans about this territory, but for now they still haven't started the real implementation of their general plan for offensive operation, probably in direction of Izum, Oskol River, and in Kharkiv direction or something like this. And furthermore, we got some more details and updates from the from Ukraine, from the political updates. There are going to be less help from the United States of America during the 2024, and it's according to information we have, the Ukrainians will achieve a lowest level of help in the comparison with the previous 2 years. The Ukrainians continue military purges. Let's say lots of questions Zelensky office has to the officers and to 3rd Brigade itself about the Battle of Avdiivka. Zelensky is mad. He doesn't know what to do. He knows what to do, but it's obviously his more anger than the real, let's say, cold mind in this situation when what he wants to do. So obviously the situation is going to be to worsen and worsen when talking about political and about military situation. Also, the Ukrainian sources published the statistic about the man population in Ukraine, and according to information we have, currently 11% of man population of Ukraine currently is on military duty, and the thing is that around 13% of Ukrainian man population is already invalid. So imagine yourself that the Ukrainians, 13% of man population who can serve in army is already invalids, and most of them become this category of population during the special military operation. So now the Ukrainians have more invalids than the real army that stretch along the line of combat contact. So it's a very bad situation for population, obviously, and once again this situation is going to worsen more and more. And of course, another updates from Poland. Poland had just the ground blockade, road blockade, and now the Polish farmers started the railway blockade with the purpose to completely stop any transferring and transportation of cargo from Ukraine to Europe. So the situation once again on this direction is getting worse and worse. And that's it for the short video. Military summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.